Now, the rest of the story. It was the youngsters with whom he wandered the streets of the west side of Manhattan who first called him Jack. In fact, he began calling himself Jack after a while. Stickball and Potsy were the two most popular games in his neighborhood. Jack did more watching than playing. He never quite kept up with the other children. The boy's physical frailty concerned his father, so much so that when Jack was 10, it was announced that he was being sent to a summer camp in Vermont. Camp Connebucket was called. Maybe the fresh air and vigorous atmosphere would do him some good. However, Jack's first night away from home was a lonely one. Not that he missed his parents exactly, but he did miss their being nearby. The woodland surrounding Harvey Lake was nice and quiet compared to the city, but it was an imperfect stillness, invaded by the menacing sizzle of a million unimaginable insects. Next day, Jack really did have something to worry about. You see, the recreational emphasis of the camp was on horseback riding. Jack was just plain scared of horses. So scared that when it was time to saddle up, he hid. He ran away and hid. In fact, every time the counselors brought the horses out of the stable, Jack would run off, most often paddling in the clear, cool waters of Harvey Lake. Almost a week passed before the camp director had it. As long as Jack refused to ride with the other boys, he would simply have to stay behind and do chores. Well, Jack was relieved. Chores sounded easy enough. And then he heard about chore number one. There was a lot of debris on the bottom of Harvey Lake, dead branches mostly, and if it built up below the diving board, it would create a hazard. So Jack was told to remove the lake bottom junk. Incidentally, the water was 12 feet deep. But how, the boy asked, was he supposed to do that? The camp director smiled and said, just swim down there and take it out a piece at a time. Well, anything was better than dealing with those horses, so little Jack went down to the lake, waded in, waist high. Holding a deep breath, he made his first wide-eyed visit to the silent world. And you know what? It was the beginning of a love affair that would last a lifetime. Oh, by the way, many years later, September 1981, a little lake in Vermont made the newspapers. Evidently, the locals were considering a hydroelectric plant right there on the lake's only tributary, until some fella came along and pledged $13,500 toward the protection of those waters. That's right, it was Harvey Lake. And the man who came to its rescue, fondly recalling the first underwater swim there, was Jack. Of course, all grown up now. And it began with a fear of horses for a little boy whose friends called him Jack and who got hooked on diving at 12 feet, but one day plunged 4.5 miles and became the inventor of the aqua lung, the commander of the Calypso, the undersea explorer the whole world remembers and reveres as Jacques Cousteau. Only now you know the rest of the story.
And now, the rest of the story. Jacques Cousteau is one of those rare cases in which a human has taken on a mythical status. I admire him for wanting to make our world a better place, or at least trying to keep us from destroying it. Maybe one day we'll listen. Jacques Cousteau was born in June 1910 in Saint-André-de-Cubzac, France. As Mr. Harvey explained, he was 10 years old the summer his parents sent him and his brother, Pierre-Antoine, to that Vermont summer camp near Harvey's Lake in the town of Barnet. Daniel Cousteau, Jacques' father, was a French attorney, which allowed him and his family to live in different parts of the world. In 1920, when Jacques and his brother were sent to that summer camp, Daniel was working on an international treaty in New York City. School was boring to Jacques. His brain needed more of a challenge than he was getting in school. He was expelled while in high school after he broke 17 of the school's windows. Jacques was thirsty for knowledge, and he daydreamed of those times he had used the reeds he'd collected at the edge of Harvey's Lake to allow him to stay underwater for longer periods of time. In 1930, he graduated from the French Naval Academy as a gunnery officer. He wanted to become a Navy pilot, but a car accident in 1936 in which Jacques broke numerous bones, including both of his arms, and he had temporary paralysis on his right side, well, that ended that career path. But as one door closes, another one opens. And so it was for Jacques, who set his sights on underwater exploration. Remember, he was in the French Navy. In 1936, while serving on the battleship Condorcet, Jacques borrowed a pair of early underwater goggles and began carrying out underwater experiments. Jacques once said, "When you dive, you begin to feel that you're an angel. It's a liberation of your weight. Man has only to sink beneath the surface and he is free." Now, while I was in college, I took a scuba diving class, and I can totally agree with Jacques here. It was so peaceful. Jacques was dissatisfied with the short length of time that the diving equipment availed him, so he began making improvements. He also began making underwater films. In 1943, the Congress of Documentary Film awarded Jacques with a prize for a documentary he co-directed called 18 Meters Deep. It was the first French underwater documentary, and it was made without any breathing devices. They used a depth pressure-proof camera. Now, this was half a century before GoPro cameras. Then Jacques co-directed a low-budget documentary called Shipwrecks. For filming, Jacques and his co-director, Philippe Tallier, were able to stay underwater for longer periods of time by using the aqua lung. Now, Admiral Lemonnier saw the documentary and put Jacques and Philippe in charge of setting up the French Navy's underwater research group. In 1949, Jacques left the French Navy. In the following year, Jacques founded the French Oceanographic Campaigns and leased a ship called Calypso. He had the former minesweeper ship converted into an oceanographic research ship. In 1975, Jacques' ship Calypso was immortalized in song by another outspoken environmentalist, John Denver. His song, Calypso, peaked at number 2 on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100. In 1953, Jacques published his first book, The Silent World, a story of undersea discovery and adventure in which he correctly predicted the existence of the echolocation abilities of porpoises. In 1959, he and his team created the SP-350 diving saucer, which was an experimental underwater vehicle that could reach a depth of up to 500 meters. That's about a third of a mile deep. In the 1960s, Jacques worked on a project to build manned undersea colonies called continental shelf stations. The 1960 project was Conshelf 1. In 1963, the second project was called Conshelf 2. The third in 1965 was called Conshelf 3. In the Conshelf experiments, aquanauts, that's what they were called, aquanauts, lived and worked for 3 weeks in depths of up to 328 feet. This was called saturation diving. Jacques dreamed of solving the world's energy crisis by channeling the sea's tides and temperatures, and by extracting essential raw materials from the ocean floor. He foresaw a day when the world's population could be fed by plantations hundreds of feet beneath the ocean. The Conshelf experiments were successful in that we still use saturation diving for commercial and scientific purposes. Americans got to know Jacques through his hugely popular television series, The Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau, which ran from 1966 to 1976, another documentary series, The Cousteau Odyssey, which ran from 1977 to 82, along with numerous other documentaries. He narrated the shows in English with his soothing voice and heavy French accent, and the viewers loved it. 8 of his 1-hour episodes won Emmy Awards. When ABC canceled his series in 1976, Jacques said, "I think they underestimated the public. It is thirsty for knowledge, not for the junk that is offered." Well, PBS didn't underestimate the public. When Jacques' contract with ABC expired, PBS signed him to a 12-part series on underwater exploration and investigation of lost civilizations. Jacques won 3 Academy Awards for Best Documentary for The Silent World in 1957, Les Poissons Rouges in 1959, and World Without Sun in 1965. The Silent World also won him the grand prize at the 1956 Cannes Film Festival. Jacques was an advocate for environmental protection and maintaining the delicate balance of the ecosystem. He said, "The future of civilization depends on water. I beg you all to understand this." Let me say that again. That's pretty important here. The future of civilization depends on water. I beg you all to understand this. Jacques Cousteau changed the way we see our world. The environmental group Greenpeace said, before Cousteau, the public only saw the surface of the oceans. Thanks to him, the public discovered the source of life that's underneath and the necessity to protect it. Jacques' goal here was not money. He was after enlightenment, understanding. He was not a wealthy man. He ran the nonprofit Cousteau Foundation, but he had no office. He had no secretary. He explained, "I get no salary. I own nothing. Not a house, no car. A few assets are owned by my wife. If my wife divorced me, I do not wish that, I would be naked in the world." When Jacques Cousteau died on June the 25th, 1997, his foundation said he has rejoined the silent world. Now we should all be just a little bit like Jacques Cousteau. We should do our part to protect our oceans, our water, our planet. So far, it's the only one we've got. I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching. And now you know the rest of the story.